What if I told you the dark wizard of Led Zeppelin and the golden voice of Bad Company joined forces to create the most expensive elevator music in history? They had the pedigree, they had the money, they had the whole world watching, and they decided to use all of that power to play fretless bass solos and synth pop. Here's how the firm took a whole lot of love and turned it into a whole lot of nothing. So it was 1983, and Jimmy Page was a ghost. Since John Bonham died and Led Zeppelin crashed into the wall of history in 1980, Page hadn't done much. He was floating around, looking thin, pale, got over a nasty heroin addiction, and frankly looking like a guy that wasn't sure if he even wanted to pick up a guitar ever again. He was living in the shadow of the biggest band of the 70s, and the silence was deafening. Or at least the biggest band really worth anything of the 70s. On the other side of the tracks, you got Paul Rogers. Dude was a machine. He had just left Bad Company, the band that cranked out hits like they were working on a factory line. And Rogers was looking for a bit of a change, though. He wanted to be taken seriously. He was really into stretching out. Didn't want to just be the guy who sings like Feel Like Making Love all the time. So Jimmy and Paul bump into each other during the A.R.M.S charity concerts. These shows were put together to help Ronnie Lane, the bass player from The Faces, who had multiple sclerosis. Turned out to be who's who of British rock. Clapton was there, Beck was there, Page was there trying to shake off the rust. Page and Paul started jamming backstage. Two guys, a couple of amps, bottle of whatever was handy, and something clicked. Or at least they thought it clicked. They looked at each other and saw a life raft. Page saw a guy who could actually sing, someone who could hold down a stage, while Page figured out if his fingers still worked. Rogers saw Jimmy Page. I mean, it's Jimmy Page. You don't say no to the guy who wrote Kashmir. But right from the start, the vibe was weird. They did not want to start a band. They wanted to start a business. No cynicism here. That was literally the plan. They decided to call the band The Fern, not the Dragons or the Thunder Up Your Hindside or anything cool. The Firm, like a law office. A group of guys are going to audit your taxes. They even announced in interviews that they wanted to avoid the whole supergroup label. They just wanted to play music. But then they went out and hired a rhythm section that screamed supergroup. They get Tony Franklin on bass. This dude's known as the fretless monster. He played a fretless bass, which has this weird, sliding, slippery sound to it. Sounds like a rubber band stretching. Hard to keep that damn intonation on one of those things, too. It's great for jazz fusion or atmospheric 80s pop. But if you're going to try to use it in hard rock, it's kind of meh, not the best. Then they get Chris Slade on drums. Dude's a powerhouse, but he was a hired gun. So you've got these four guys in a room. You have expectations of millions of Led Zeppelin fans who have been starving for 3 years. You have Bad Company fans who want to drink beer and smash things. And the firm decides the best move is to ignore all of that. So they went into the studio in 1984 with a specific goal. Do not sound like Led Zeppelin and do not sound like Bad Company. Now imagine you're a chef. You're famous for making the best damn steak in the world. People line up around the block for your wonderful steak. And then you decide you want to open a new restaurant. Only this time, the only thing that you serve is boiled cabbage, just to prove that you can. That, in a nutshell, was the firm. They started recording their self-titled debut, and the sound was cold, slick. It was 1984 in the worst way. And Jimmy Page, the pioneer of the heavy riff, the guy who made guitars sound like mountains falling into the ocean, was playing these kind of thin, clean chords, using a gizmotron, which is a weird little gadget that bows the strings, messing around with textures. And Paul Rogers was singing about, well, nobody really remembers what he was singing about because the lyrics were pretty damn generic. But the real disaster, the moment where everybody looked at each other and said, uh-oh, was the single, Radioactive. Now the label they wanted to hit. They needed something for MTV. So Paul Rogers brings in this song called Radioactive. Starts with a drum machine beat, or at least it sounds like one. It's a real stiff sounding beat. Then that fretless bass comes sliding in, mwah, mwah, mwah. Page starts playing the scratchy, funky little rhythm part. And it's catchy. Page even threw in one of those famous guitar finger exercises, actually meant to sync the fretting hand and the pick, but I digress. But it's not rock, it's pop. It's the kind of song you might hear in a car commercial. They decided to film a video for it. And this is where things went from questionable to embarrassing. The shoot turned out to be a nightmare of 80s cliches. They set up a soundstage that was mostly shadow and dry ice. The director wanted it moody. He wanted the mystery. What he got was a mess. Jimmy Page is standing there and he's looking fragile, wearing a suit which looks kind of off. Page belongs in dragon pants or velvet. Ask George Costanza, he would tell you velvet rocks. not a suit that looks like it's about to sell you a timeshare in Florida. He's holding his guitar, doing his classic poses, leaning back, guitar all slung low, but the energy just isn't there. Looks like he's trying to remember where he parked his car. And you got Paul Rogers doing his thing, spinning the mic stand and puffing his chest out, wearing a white t-shirt and a blazer with the sleeves all rolled up. Looks like he's trying to pick up a couple cougars at a karaoke bar. But then the special effects kicked it. The camera zooms in on Page's guitar solo, and the solo in Radioactive is pretty cool. Weird, disjointed. But in the video, they put the cheesy neon laser effects over his fingers, like some kind of cheap sci-fi movie. Looks like Tron on a budget of $5. And then you got the Tony Franklin problem. Every time the camera cuts to him, he's doing something distracting, sliding his hands up and down that fretless neck, making faces like he's solving a math problem, wearing those big 80s sunglasses indoors, trying so hard to be cool that it loops back around to just being purely uncool. And there's a moment where the band is backlit, silhouetted against a blue light. It's supposed to look epic, supposed to look like the giants of rock returning to reclaim their throne. Instead, it looks like a corporate boardroom meeting with instruments. Video hits MTV. Reaction was immediate confusion. The kids grew up hearing stories about the mighty Zeppelin, and so they tuned in. They were expecting pure fire, danger, expected the hammer of the gods. What they saw was a dude in a suit playing a song with a synth beat while the bass player went in the background. So the album finally comes out, and it sold well at first because of the names on the cover. But then people actually cracked it open and started listening. Aside from Radioactive, I made Midnight Moonlight, which was actually an old unfinished Zeppelin song called the Swan Song. The record was a snooze fest. Mid-tempo blues rock with zero teeth. Sounded a bit like Bad Company and Tranquilizers. That also sounded a bit like Led Zeppelin had they been forced to record at gunpoint in a library. But the band committed to it. They booked a massive tour, playing arenas. They're treating this like it was the biggest damn thing in the world. And that's where the horror really unfolded. The shows were odd. The crowds were huge, but they weren't there for the firm. They were there for the ghosts of the past. You look out into the sea of people at the Wembley Arena or Madison Square Garden, and 90% of the t-shirts were Led Zeppelin. The other 10% were Bad Company. Nobody was wearing a shirt for the firm because the shirts looked like corporate letterhead. The lights would go down, the roar would go up, the band would walk out. They'd start playing Closer, a plodding horn-heavy song from the new album. The crowd would be polite, they would clap, but then between songs you'd hear it. A low rumble at first and then getting louder. Stairway, Rock and Roll, Black Dog, Hot's On for Nowhere. Page and Rogers had made a rule. No Led Zeppelin songs. No Bad Company songs. They're going to play material from the firm and maybe a couple of solo Paul Rogers tunes. Imagine standing on stage looking at 20,000 people who worship you and refusing to give them the one thing they want. It's a power move, but it's also a great way to kill a vibe. Jimmy Page would step up to the mic to introduce the song, mumble something about new directions. The crowd would go, Zeppelin, right over him. He'd look annoyed, step back, turn up his amp and launch into Make or Break, a generic rocker that sounded like 1,000 other bands in 1985. And there was one night in particular in the Midwest where the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The crowd was getting restless. They were bored. They had paid good money to see the guitar god, and he was giving them fretless bass jam. Tony Franklin started a bass solo. Now, bass solos are risky in the best of times. A fretless bass solo in front of a crowd of drunk Zeppelin fans is just a crash course for all things gone wrong. He starts sliding up and down the neck, making those wail noises. He was feeling it. His eyes were closed. Thought he was creating art. Someone in the front row threw a cup, landed on stage with a wet thud, and then another. So Page looks over at Rogers. Rogers looks at the crowd. He was a pro. He grabbed the mic. We're going to slow things down a bit, he said. Then the crowd booed. They didn't want slow. Hell, they wanted communication breakdown. They played Radioactive. The crowd cheered because they recognized it from TV. But as soon as it was over, the chanting started again. Zeppelin! Zeppelin! It was torture. You could see it on Page's face. He knew. This was not working. He was playing the notes, but the fire just wasn't there. Trying to forge this new identity, but he was shackled to a legacy that was just too big to ignore. So the tour ends, they take a break. Should have stopped there. Should have shaken hands, cashed those checks, and got the hell out of Dodge. But they didn't. They went back in the studio. They decided to double down. And the second album was called Mean Business. See, even the title sounded like a threat from a tax auditor. Cover art shows the four of them standing in shadows looking Well, miserable. They released a single called All the King's Horses. It was even softer than Radioactive. It had keyboards, had a very polite melody. Sounded like music that you would hear while shopping for loafers at a department store. They went on tour again in '86. This time the crowds were smaller. Curiosity, gone. Fans had figured it out. This was not Led Zeppelin version 2. This was not Bad Company on steroids. It was Bad Company on Quaaludes after getting butt rammed by Zeppelin. Just four guys collecting a paycheck. The energy in the band was dead. Jimmy Page looked bored. And that's saying something, because he always generally would look bored unless he happened to be waving his hands at a theremin. Paul Rogers looked like he was punching a clock. But Tony Franklin, man, he was not. He was just loving it. That damn fretless bass was sliding all around, but nobody was listening. The reviews, brutal. Critics called them the flop, called the music dinosaur rock, which back then was actually a really, really huge insult. Nowadays it'd be a compliment. But the biggest thing, they said Page had lost his magic. And the worst part is the band knew it. There was no big explosion or fist fight backstage, no TVs getting thrown out of hotel windows. They just finished the tour dates, played the last song and the last set, and then they walked off stage. Jimmy Page went one way, Paul Rogers went the other way. The business was closed.